Scope 1, 2 and 3 relates to greenhouse gas emissions, and they were terms that were defined by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. What they relate to is I guess the level of directness of greenhouse gas emissions of an organisation. So Scope 1 emissions are actually those emissions that are directly attributable to your business's operations. So for an electricity producer, if you're producing electricity using coal, the burning of that coal emissions are Scope 1 emissions. It also relates to organisations that burn fuels or other greenhouse gas emission materials on their site. So if I was to look over, take a helicopter view over my manufacturing site, and I used diesel fuel to generate electricity, the emissions arising out of my site would actually be Scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are typically those related to emissions related to the energy produced that you then use through the electricity grid. And the reason it's Scope 2 is that the emissions were actually generated outside of your site. So if you're looking over your manufacturing site, they weren't released at your site, but you are using the electricity on your site. Scope 3 is actually a next layer further removed from the organisation's operations. So Scope 3 emissions would be emissions related to services or goods delivered to your organisation that have resulted in some emissions being released. So a typical example would be air flights. So a flight taken by employees in your organisation would be Scope 3 emissions for the flights that they've taken. It gets interesting though, if you owned the airplane, it would be a Scope 1 emission.